all of the conservation opportunities that still exist in this area are going to come on the agricultural landscape. So lastly, I'd like to just point out that what determines the conservation potential of these landscapes are the decisions that farmers are making. So farmers are the ones who are making decisions about how much forest to leave, where to leave it, whether or not to leave riparian areas and how much and how wide. They're making decisions about whether or not to leave trees in their pastures, whether or not to establish windbreaks, etc. And they're making lots of management decisions about the pasture itself. Will they use fire? Will they use pesticides, fertilizers, etc.? And all of those decisions collectively leads to a particular structure and composition of the landscape, which in turn determines its biodiversity value and also its value for ecosystem service provision. And in many cases, the decisions, and in most cases, the decisions they're making are really driven by productive reasons. So they're leaving trees and pastures not because they're important habitats for birds, but because they provide timber, shade, fodder for the cattle production, and actually their cattle production can be better with certain levels of tree densities. So in many cases, the decisions can be complementary, then leaving the trees for productive reasons, yet we have conservation benefits out of them. But in some cases, we're going to see trade-offs where farmer decisions are going to be negative for conservation. And what we need to do is thinking very carefully about how do we take advantage of the synergies and how do we minimize those trade-offs. So I'd just like to leave by saying that if we want to take advantage of the opportunities for biodiversity conservation in these landscapes, the critical thing is creating those partnerships with farmers and finding ways in which we can manage the landscape, not only so that they are sustainable in the long term and productive, but in ways that are compatible with biodiversity conservation. And I think there is a huge window of opportunity for achieving conservation goals in these landscapes, one that we've really not recognized is open, and we need to take advantage of that before the opportunity is gone. Thank you very much.
Nice, thank you. Thank you very much, Sita. That's exactly, I think, what we needed to hear, in a sense, to link what we heard from Vicky and others about how comfortable traditional and indigenous farmers are with these kind of complex systems and what the consequences of that are for biodiversity in those particular kinds of tropical landscapes. But I think many, if not all of us, have had experience in different parts of the world of seeing how surprising, just how extraordinary is the biodiversity of certain kinds of farming systems, and of course how low the biodiversity is of other kinds of farming systems. Let's now move to our last speaker before we ask MS to wrap it all up. This will be Dr. Sandy Andelman, who's the Executive Director of Vital Signs Africa, as well as Vice President of Conservation International. She is probably known to many of you for her work with TEAM, which has been looking at how we can track in real time forest cover in the tropics. She is, I think, with Vital Signs Africa, which is really why I wanted her to speak. She's going to help us to see how, as we think about engaging in agriculture, it's going to be another of those efforts where we've got to move to landscape scale, and we've got to be able to think in a more integrated way. And Vital Signs, I think, is a novel and rather important initiative of that kind. So, over to you.
Thanks, Ken. So coming back to the beginning of this session, where Johan Rockström really elegantly pointed out that, this is the end game. We are running out of resources. And so conservationists really have to form a common agenda with agriculture. So I want to say a little bit about how I think we can create that common agenda, and then from some of the experience with creating Vital Signs, point out some of the key issues that we have to address. So the issue of a common agenda that was raised by Braulio and others. So if you think about it, traditionally the success of agricultural development has been measured with two main metrics of success: change in crop yield and change in income for someone. So if you think of it that way, it's not surprising that agriculture degrades the environment, because there aren't metrics or signals of success that are saying, how are we doing for the environment? And similarly, if you think of, what has historically for many years was, at least, the traditional metrics or measures of success for conservation, it's been what percentage of the land and water on Earth are in protected areas. So it's not surprising then that there are conflicts between conservation, people and wildlife, or conservation and agriculture. So we have to really create this common agenda by trying to identify a set of common metrics and indicators of success that span these different silos of decision making that we have historically had. So one issue related to this is, creating collaborative partnerships. So it's now about, I think, 2.5 years ago that we began a discussion with the Gates Foundation where they challenged us to really say, can you work with a diverse community across, agriculture, the private sector, NGOs, academia, conservation, and come up with a minimal common set of metrics? And then the second thing was, can we then go out and collect the evidence that, as Patrick talked about, we really need to change the orthodoxy. So, monitoring, metrics, and evidence are not necessarily very sexy, but it's actually a key part of changing, the traditional way of making agricultural development decisions and other development decisions. So, and then the second part of the challenge that the Gates Foundation gave us was, okay, so even if you have a common set of metrics, can you, for a reasonable cost, actually go out and measure these things? So we proposed to do this in Tanzania, and we actually got a grant to do a pilot project and see if we could measure these things. And the scale that we envisioned doing this was a scale of about 5,000 square kilometers. And we had been working in a forest reserve, the Zungwa Mountains in Tanzania, and that's a key area for providing ecosystem services to the Kilombero Valley in the south, which is an important area for rice production and other sorts of agriculture. So it seemed to us like a natural sort of extension, because we could measure the flow of services from this forest to agriculture and also look at what people were getting from the forest. So they gave us the grant, and then 2 weeks later called and said, you know what, it's just not going to work for us. And I said, what do you mean? We have to give the money back? And they said, no, but it's just too small. And if you, the conservation community, want to influence us, the Gates Foundation, and our partners, you have to work at the scales at which we work and produce evidence at the scales we work in order to have an influence on us. So it's exactly the point that Braulio was making, that we have to go beyond pilot projects. So I said, okay, what scale is that? And he said, well, in Tanzania, this is 300,000 square kilometers. This is the area that the government has designated as the breadbasket. And I said, we don't have any idea how to do that, how to collect the information at all the required scales to really get an integrated system-level perspective. So, from human well-being, the households, to the agriculture, to nature. And they just said, well, you know, we'll give you more money, find some other smart people to work with, but we won't give you more time. So we actually found that we could, in a cost-effective way, through partnerships like with the World Bank Living Standards Measurement Survey, that is collecting, you know, data on human well-being, collect this information and really start to put together a system-level perspective of agriculture, nature, biodiversity, and the services it provides, and human well-being. And so the Gates Foundation said, great, now let's do the world. And my response was, you know, I'm a scientist. I said, well, wait, we've just tried this in one place. We don't know whether these are the right metrics. We don't know whether these methods are going to work in, you know, Brazil or the Mekong. So we need to, you know, look at a few other places and then see. And they said, you know what, we don't have time. Because, you know, we have to figure out how to produce more food. And if you look at the goals that are being set for agricultural development, you know, of doubling, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa has set a goal of doubling food production in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Ghana in 3 years, and tripling food production in 13 countries in Africa in 10 years. So it's an important lesson that I think we as conservationists really have to take on board, is that, I mean, these landscape scales that Celia was talking about are really important, because this is the scale at which we can really understand the interactions between the decision-making of farmers or other sorts of land owners or managers, you know, and how all these processes play out spatially and temporally. But then we've got to be able to scale it up and produce the evidence to change the way agricultural development decisions are being made. So, so this has been a very interesting process for us, and a real learning experience. But I think, you know, the message is that we can, we can change business as usual to a different approach. And, you know, we can work productively with some very, you know, seemingly unlikely partners, but that we really have to be willing to take some risks and do things in a different way and think on very, very big scales.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, among the most impossible tasks imaginable now would be to try to summarize and bring together this panel. But fortunately, in MS Swaminathan, of course, we have someone who has done such impossible tasks regularly. It's really wonderful to have you here, sir. I'm sure he's well known to all of you, co-founder of the original Green Revolution. So many incredible roles you have played in over the years in bridging these communities. What say you now to what we're talking about?
Thank you, Ken. I think it was a very well-planned discussion, starting with Prince Charles. And I mean, the main message, you know, what we call the web of life, don't interfere with it, we'll have a problem. I have seen Prince Charles' farm, organic farm. I think there are several farms. One large farm I saw. It's a sort of a 7-year rotation. 5 years of clover with animal husbandry, and 2 years of wheat or barley or any of those crops. It's a very well-organized production system where all the foundations of successful agriculture are all conserved, and whether it's land, it's water, biodiversity, and so on. So I think it's an appropriate person to, from practical experience, not only theoretical experience, but also from practical experience, to say. Now let me pick up a few points. I think first, I was also listening to the presentations, one could easily see like what Victoria said, if you come from a country predominantly of family farmers are very conscious. Sometimes they may be compelled in order to get some more money from a small plot of land. Otherwise, they are conscious of the need to preserve soil fertility, because it means not only it's a way of life, in addition to a means to livelihood, most of the family farmers. And therefore happy at the instance of the Philippines, I think, 2014 has been declared as the International Year of Family Farmers. And I think we have to. Industrial farming has its own problems, but the family farmers are anxious to maintain biodiversity, but if the market doesn't demand it, then they have a problem. The number of interrelated, so I would suggest we should look at the problem in somewhat segmented way, from a purely industrial agriculture, large-scale industrial, commercial agriculture, to those who are not, I'm not about indigenous people alone, but also all the others, family farmers. Nearly 400 million farming families are in our world. Each with 5 means 2 billion of the people are kinds of family farmers. I'm happy that increasingly international organizations are developing instruments, at least for monitoring and understanding what is happening. Dr. Alexander Muller has recently set up a global soil partnership in FAO, mainly to see that soil awareness comes in, the need to conserve the soil, health and soil fertility. There's a global water partnership already existing in Stockholm, they have formulated. And a global soil partnership, water partnership, because land and water go together. So I hope, and also the biodiversity convention, the executive director is here. All of them should do some more work, how to bring to them too. One area of biodiversity is what was very, very nicely highlighted by Neil Vietma, the lost crops of the Incas, the lost crops of Africa, the US National Academy of Sciences publications. They show what we have really lost. I mean, the lost crops of the Incas show a very large number of plants upon which earliest civilizations were dependent, both for food security and health security. The medicinal plants go along with. They look at the biodiversity, both from the health point of view as well as from the food point of view. I think we have to give much more attention, as Dr. Emil Frisan said, to the whole conservation of agro-biodiversity, and ex situ preservation is going on. For example, the gene bank of the International Rice Research Institute alone has over 100,000 accessions of rice. But one thing we should ask ourselves when we say the world has over 150,000 varieties of rice, how did they come from? They are all selection by local people. It's a farmer, that's what is called by FAO as farmers' rights. Those who have selected, conserved biodiversity at personal cost for public good. How many of us will do for public good at personal cost? It is only the local communities, the indigenous people. They have all conserved not only traditional wisdom, but also the lost crops still conserved. And down below, somewhere here, I saw a wonderful poster by Stefano Padalosi of Biodiversity International. It shows the enormous value of local level biodiversity in terms of food security, not only food security, but nutrition security, nutrition, micronutrients and so on, which are equally important. Not only hunger, chronic or endemic hunger, but hidden hunger caused by deficiency of vitamin A, vitamin B12, zinc, iron, iodine and so on. They are, in fact, iron deficiency anemia is much more widely prevalent than purely undernutrition. This is where the biodiversity provides an immediate scope. You can leverage agriculture for nutrition security. For example, we have designed a farming system called Farming System for Nutrition. What I am trying to say, not only conservation and agriculture, but nutrition and agriculture have to come together. And there are wonderful varieties of CGIAR itself has a program called Harvest Plus, something more than like your Nature Plus, Harvest Plus, micronutrients of various kinds. There are wonderful varieties of pearl millet, which have a very high iron. There's a quality protein maize. Moringa your drumstick is called. It has got all the macronutrients which you require. In other words, there is strong agricultural remedies for nutritional maladies. So I would say, apart from the fact that you have the advantage of food security in a larger sense, but the nutrition security is very important. Here I would like to suggest to FAO, they should change the terminology of many of these millets and so on. They are somehow called coarse cereals. It gives the wrong impression. Somewhat inferior to wheat or rice and so on. We have now changed the term to nutri-cereals, because that reflects much more accurately their nutritional value. Because many times in public mind, these terminologies are also important, and we must change the terminology from coarse cereals to nutrition. Problems of equity and also the transgressing safe boundaries, I entirely agree. I think the points which you have made, there is also, fortunately, there is now ecological footprint measurement which is coming up now and then. WWF does it and others do it. The biocapacity of the land in relation to the footprint or the demand we are making on natural resources. This is important. These are good methods of educating people. When you say your ecological footprint, how do you promote more sustainable lifestyles, sustainable living with resources?